All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Friday of May. This is the last May of this year. Okay. Uh, yeah, or it may not be. Never mind. Okay. So this is the last of the Gainwell Breakfast series for this season. We usually take our summer months off just because everybody seems to go out of town and gives us a chance to break. And we will be putting together a new calendar and schedule, and that will be released sometime probably early July. So we'll resume the breakfast series in probably August is my yes, I know I have those dates someplace, but look for the email coming to you with the new series schedule and calendar on that. Maureen Book is the person working in the background for us, and she will be able to answer questions about either the registration, the handouts, or the evaluation and certificates. She will put her contact information in the email, the chat box. So if you have issues, you can reach out to Maureen for this webinar. Let's see. I think that's it in terms of housekeeping stuff. Our breakfast series sponsor this morning is Ryan McGuire. I can't remember your name, Ryan. Sorry. Ryan McGuire from Griswold Home Care. And he's a frequent visitor and supporter of our breakfast series. So we're very appreciative for his support this morning. Ryan, what's new in the world of the caregiver stuff now?
Well, there's a bunch of exciting things. There's always something new happening. I am actually just submitted a proposal for the Aging in Texas conference, and coming up in Austin at the end of July, I believe. So, that'll be something that maybe some of your folks can get up to, and keep on the radar. But yeah, do you want me to go ahead and
Yeah, I was gonna ask what I know that COVID is kind of technically over, but that really had a lot of changes in the industry, especially for you guys as well. What are some of the lasting effects that you're seeing in your industry from COVID?
I think, the big challenge, I think, through COVID, outside of the protocols and, kind of tracing, and like limiting exposures, all those kinds of things. We've moved past the majority of that with just the reduction in cases. But I think a lot of it is, managing your team and your staffing levels. That I think is kind of a lasting impact. There's always been, or probably for the last half decade or so, the staffing shortage or healthcare in healthcare workers has been on the radar. I think COVID accelerated that, and then we're still seeing a little bit of it now, but. It's really just about, the really good agencies have adjusted their recruiting practices, and we offer healthcare benefits to all, full-time employees, and, really make sure that our care team knows that they're valued and appreciated.
Got it. What are the minimum hours for services for Griswolds?
So for us, our only minimum is a 2-hour shift minimum. So we don't have like a minimum number of hours per week that you have to schedule. I think most people have a 4-hour shift minimum, and then some have like you have to have 3 shifts a week. We just have a 2-hour shift minimum. So we have some folks that get 2 hours once every couple months when they have a doctor's appointment. So really is driven completely by the client and the family and what the needs are.
And are your caregivers able to do transportation of the clients?
Yes.
Like to their doctor appointments?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we can drive the caregiver's car, or the caregiver can take the client's car, can drive the client in their own car. If the caregiver drives the client's car, there's no extra charge. It's just a flat, included in the flat rate. So, and then even if they take the caregiver's car, it's just like the IRS standard rate. So nothing so basically it's pretty affordable.
Yeah, yeah. What else about Griswold do we need to know?
Well, I think we've been in San Antonio for 20 years. This is our 20th year. My parents started Griswold Home Care in San Antonio when they retired from the military, the Army here in San Antonio, and so that's like when I was in high school, 20 years it was a long time. So kind of saw that them get the company off the ground. And now we're one of the largest agencies out there. We have good caregiver coverage for your clients. Very flexible. We kind of talked about the 2-hour minimum. Another thing to address with kind of the shortage in the industry on caregivers is some folks reduce their standards in hiring, and that's something that we have never done. We've always maintained our level of requirements for our caregivers. We go through about 100 applicants a week to find the best 5. So that's our typical numbers and what we see. And in home care, you really have to be kind of a hiring agency. You have to have enough folks to support your clients. And then we also work a lot with the VA. And so that's been a growing program. So for folks that don't know about this program, this is separate from aid and attendance. So many folks are familiar with aid and attendance. This program is through the community-based care at the VA, and so it's all done at the local level. And there's 2 programs: home health aid and in-home respite. But families can get 6 to 25 hours a week approved through this program. There's no financial requirement like aid and attendance. And no service-connected disability requirement. It's really just based on need and being enrolled in VA healthcare. So that's a big one we always like to bring up, because not many folks, especially outside of the VA, know about it. And even some people within the VA get it confused with other programs. So if you have a veteran that needs home care, reach out to me, and we can walk them through the process.
And the VA pays for those services?
Yes, yeah, correct. So through that program, they pay 100% of it. The veteran will never even see an invoice. We bill the VA directly. It's just a really good program.
Excellent, excellent.
Yep.
And I really like the fact that you guys are providing benefits for the caregivers. That's very, very, very valuable for those people. So
yeah,
absolutely.
Yep, it's part of just keeping your good caregivers on board with you. Our average tenure is over 2.5 years. I think a lot of it is because we've have caregivers that have been with us for over a decade now. So really, I think it pays off in the service, and it makes our lives easier too. And we know someone's going to be there when they say they're going to be there.
Awesome.
So
Yeah.
for everybody.
Very cool. Ryan, there was a question that somebody asked about the Aging in Texas conference. Do you know if CEs are available for that conference?
Yes, I believe they are. Let me see. Go ahead. Yeah, so I'll put the link in the chat with all the information. That way y'all have it.
Gotcha. All right.
Appreciate that. Yep, there's the link there for all the information. I mean, they've offered CEs in the past, so I'm assuming they're doing the same this year. It's still open to submit a proposal until Monday. So if any of your listeners or attendees have something they feel like they want to share, it's a great venue. So basically, it's all the area agency and aging in Texas go to this conference. So all their representatives and their team members, and every county has an area agency on aging. We have one here in Bexar County. and they're great. It's a great program, so they've got to support our older adults. And so, if you have something you think is valuable and you want to share with them, it's a good place to do it.
Great. And Ryan, if you'll go ahead and put your contact information in the chat box, that way we know how to get a hold of you if we needed to.
Absolutely, I will do that.
And thanks again for your support of the breakfast series and our education of the community social workers. We really appreciate it.
Yes, of course. Happy to do it.
All right. All right. Our presenter this morning comes to us from Lifetime Recovery Center. I was not as familiar with Lifetime as I had been before my contact with James. But James has worked both in the inpatient side and recently was promoted to the clinical manager for outpatient services. He is an LMSW and LCDC as well. He's got a whole bunch of other alphabet soup behind his name. But he is an amazing clinician, and I am really excited to have him join us this morning and share about trauma-informed care in the substance abuse arena. So James, tell us a little bit about Lifetime and what Lifetime does for those who may not be familiar.
Good morning. Thank you, Russell, and thank you, Ryan. So Lifetime Recovery is a nonprofit substance abuse treatment facility here in South Texas. Been in operation since 1963. We have a residential campus down on Southton Road that is currently undergoing a very big project of upgrade and remodel so that we can continue to provide quality services and keep up with the need. Currently, we have about 84 beds that we use at residential, and that is at this time, male-only facility, although we are moving to co-ed in the future. We also have the outpatient services, and that is housed out of the 96 Crossroads location. So we've got 2 locations in town where we service clients who need a lower level of care. Lifetime services the population that may not normally be able to access services. We don't turn anybody away for inability to pay. We work with what I consider marginalized individuals, people who are in the criminal justice system or through CPS that may need some extra support in their life and recovery. And let's see, 1963, we have a website that I will put into the chat right now that gives you more information about some of the things going on with Lifetime, along with the luncheon that we're hosting, capital campaigns, everything else that we've got going on. So we're in the process of growing and continuing to serve substance abuse in South Texas.
Yeah, certainly a big need for that, unfortunately, but I'm glad you guys are there to help provide that kind of support. How was it that trauma-informed care came into onto the radar screen in working with recovery?
So that goes back to when I first started residential, and that was started working with Christina Mendoza, who is still my supervisor. I kind of grew up with Lifetime, and Christina and I started asking questions and thinking about, well, why do we have such a high recidivism rate? Why do people keep coming back? And understanding that substance abuse is a symptom of something else going on underneath. It's a coping strategy that if we just keep addressing the coping strategy and not look underneath, then we'll keep seeing the same people. And then we started looking at the connection between adverse childhood experiences, which I'll get into in just a minute, and substance abuse. And then as a system. So dynamically, and also to answer the question of how can we continue to best serve clients that we serve? How do we address underlying causes and conditions? And how do we provide a place for people to work with what's ailing them and their pain, where they might not be able to get any other services.
Outstanding. Well, we look forward to hearing what you have to share with us this morning. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. And while I'm getting my information in the chat, I want to say real quick thank yous to my wife Monica for being so patient and understanding and caring, Lifetime for letting me grow up and develop, and Christina for her mentorship, and Russell and Gainwell for this opportunity. So now I'm going to do the tricky part here and start screen sharing, if I remember how to do this correctly. Share.
There you go. It's
There
shown
I-
up.
There I go. So let me do this and hit slideshow. All right. So this is the intro, ethics of trauma-informed substance abuse care. My intention in this is to bring awareness of trauma into substance use treatment in an ethical, good way, to increase the level of care provided to a marginalized population. And in my experience, sometimes, especially with the stigma around substance abuse, people who seek treatment automatically sometimes become marginalized by families and communities because, oh, well, you have those kind of problems. So couple key areas that I'm going to be looking at are trauma-informed care, ACEs and the impact of trauma, and addressing the relationship of trauma and substance abuse. And so we're going to start with backbone of trauma-informed care. Back in July of 2014, SAMHSA published the concept of trauma and guidance for a trauma-informed approach, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Association. I've listed the information there, and really it outlines 6 principles of trauma-informed care, the 3 E's of trauma, and the 4 R's of a trauma-informed approach. And from that information, we can take on the perspective that all behaviors make sense, and the effect of trauma and adversity continues to drive behavior and motivation. So things that I've experienced, the way I interpreted the world, shows up in various different behaviors, and understanding that can help with the trauma-informed approach. So the resources are there. I'll hit the 6 P's real quick and the 3 E's. Safety, trustworthiness, peer support, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice and choice, and cultural, historical, and gender issues. The 4 R's: realizing the widespread impact of trauma, recognizing the signs and symptoms of trauma in clients, responding to trauma by integrating it into practices, policies, procedures, and resist re-traumatization. And the 3 E's are event, effect, and experience. And the 3 E's are really what comes into play when we talk about substance abuse. So 1995 to 1997, a landmark study was conducted by Kaiser Permanente, where they took a look at adverse childhood experiences. The history of that is fascinating, and it's impacting how we look at treatment today as well. And this wasn't specific to substance abuse at the time. It was specific to physical health conditions, on ongoing chronic illnesses. And the correlation between the two has since been identified as well. So basic background: confidential questionnaires were given to adults, which are classified of 18 years of age or older, with a simple yes or no question for 10 questions that address various areas of adversity prior to the age of 18. Since that time, there has been a version that has been developed for children in the ages of 0 to 18. So there is one that addresses the teenage sector. And there's also been an expansion on the ACEs as well from the original 10 questions that include cultural issues, natural disasters, and other areas that may not have been considered in the original 10. For the purposes of the presentation today and the information presented, and the information is going to be based on the original 10 questions. So the 5 key trauma areas that are included in these questionnaires include abuse, neglect, abandonment, enmeshment, also known as codependency, and critical incidences. Couple of perspectives to keep in mind when we look at ACE scores is this is a way to ask what happened and also what didn't happen. Trauma and adverse childhood experiences is exasperated when there's no safe place to deregulate or process through. So there may be an event that happened, and also what didn't happen was the support. And sometimes what we see, especially in clients I've worked with, age 12, 13, 14 years old, that's where the experimentation with drugs and alcohol start as a coping mechanism to supplement the what didn't happen. I've got to deregulate my body somehow. I've got to deal with the stress. And so sometimes when I sit with a client and I look at their history and we look at their trauma history, one of the things that strikes me is, well, what other choice did a 12, 13, 14-year-old have, right? And that kind of helps bring down the defenses a little bit, and the shame and the stigma. When we start asking about these areas, some of the things that come up are denial, minimization, justification, strong emotional acting out behavior. So these questions aren't easy to ask, and I'm going to show the questions here in just a minute. But it is part of addressing the trauma behind substance abuse as well. So defense, wasn't that bad, or justification, minimizing, it only happened a couple of times. So those are some key things to look at as we address this and consider the impact of trauma in individual histories. So we're also not trying to blame or identify fault or say, well, this is why you're so off track or whatever it is. It's just about recognizing what happened and giving a voice to it. When we abuse drugs and alcohol, we stifle that voice. We don't have somewhere to say, I'm in pain, I hurt. We're actually inviting the conversation now. And so we address what happened, and a couple of things that may happen. You may have clients who grew up in the same family and went through a divorce, and one of them was able to regulate very well through it and the other one wasn't. So it's very subjective. Everybody's experience is different, and it's valued in a person-centered treatment modality that your history matters. It's not just, hey, I think that you got traumatized because of this. It's rather them telling us. So a couple considerations on this point. What are trauma-informed practices and models that can be utilized to continue the healing process? As much as I would like to put on my Superman cape and click my heels 3 times and fix everybody all at once, I've long learned that I can't really do that very well. So understanding that there are modalities that we can refer out to or highly suggest for continuing, once we get stabilized from substance use and some sobriety, to continue to work on the trauma and the adverse childhood experiences. Because healing trauma is long-term relapse prevention. So some of the things that we would consider referring out to would be cognitive processing therapy, trauma-informed ACT, trauma-informed psychodrama, EMDR, accelerated experiential dynamic psychotherapy, psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, amongst the others. There are a lot of trauma-informed modalities being birthed right now and coming into practice. Before I get into the questions, I feel the need to kind of slow down for a minute and take a drink of water. Russell, are there any questions or anything that would like to address at this point?
Nothing that is coming up. I didn't neglect to say that we are going to be monitoring the chat and the Q&A boxes. So if anybody has questions or comments that you'd like to share, the chat box or the Q&A are the places to do that. And James, I posted a link that shows a YouTube video for anybody who's not familiar with the ACEs study and some of its background, as well as the impact of what a high ACEs score does and lead into trauma-informed care. That's one done by Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. And that's, for me, when I watched that video, that was just, it floored me. I had never seen that kind of information before, and the implications of it on taking care of mental health clients was very significant. So I'm glad to see that it's also being used in the recovery treatment area as well, James.
Yes, and you're right. That is a video that also formulated my perspective and my view in the presentation. It has a link as well. So if we miss it in the chat, it's in the recommendations as well. So, okay. So here are the questions. These are the original 10. I'm going to call these the original 10. I'm not going to read them all off, but you can see they hit some pretty key areas, and they are very. Some of them are subjective, and somebody coming into treatment for the first time, going through the assessment, some of these questions are overwhelming, a little bit intimidating. So I have to consider that as well when we look at some data sets as well. One of the key questions in there that we're going to see coming back to is right under the green line. Did you live with anyone who had a problem with drinking or using drugs, including street drugs? So considering that that substance abuse impacts not only the individual, but the system as a whole is an important consideration. We talk about trauma-informed substance abuse care as well. Okay. So this is a general presentation of the original study results. I'm going to dilute these to state of Texas results and also agency data as well. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this one. I want to get to the state of Texas and the agency one as well. So 17,000 participants. You can see the demographic breakdown there. And so there were ACEs that were reported. So more often than not. So you can see 0 ACEs was at 36%. Everything else was higher. So these are, this is what Nadine Burke-Harris, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris talks about in her TED Talk of, she saw these results and she was floored. And she said, we got to do something about this. This is data we can't ignore. So to dilute this a little bit more, here's that question again. Did you live with anyone who had a problem with drinking or using drugs, including prescription drugs? Highest reported ACE for women was living in a home with someone who was drinking or using drugs. So we broke down and looked at gender-specific responses. 29.5% said yes. That was the highest ACE score reported by women. So that indicates that there's things going on inside the home that create adverse impact with somebody who's abusing substances, drugs, or alcohol. The second highest ACE score for men was living in a home with substance abuse present. And it followed physical abuse only by 6.1%. So they're pretty close. When I looked at this data, it startled me of how much of an impact substance abuse has on the family and the adverse impact that it has on the development. So the highest, as a total, highest reported ACE was physical abuse, followed only by substance abuse. I don't have enough data to make a correlation, but I will make an educated assessment that I understand the connection between those two. Substance abuse in the home disrupts boundaries and emotional regulation, which can come out as physical abuse. So I can see a connection. I don't have the data to back that up, but my experience tells me that that makes sense. So March of 2019, Texas, a study was done in Texas. The highlight on this one is that substance abuse was the third highest reported ACE. Same questions, living in a home with drug or alcohol present or street drugs. And if you look at the margin right there, it's only separated by emotional abuse by 0.1%. So substance abuse is a big issue in Texas as well. So we're starting to see the trend of how substance abuse can impact childhood adversity, trauma, and everything like that. A lot of when I work with clients, one of the things I notice is that there's a family history of substance abuse. So understanding that the individual I'm working with may be coming from a culture where this was happening and may be impacted by its effect in the home. All right, Russell, you got something before I go to agency data?
Yeah, I do. I want to, one, there's a question, I think it's a great one too. Megan Russell says, have you seen any trends regarding outcomes, either using either the ACEs screening or modality of trauma-informed care?
We have seen a lower recidivism with our agency when we've taken this approach. One of the things on our website talks about that we have a 9% recidivism rate from people referred from Bexar County Jail Diversion Program, compared to 39% of those who do not. So the trauma-informed approach was first integrated and modeled at residential. So understanding and taking that approach, we've seen the quantified data there. And we've seen I don't have the number, but I have seen a lot less repeating people come back through the doors.
I think that speaks very well of one, the program, and two, hopefully this integrated approach too. So I remember you and I were working together, kind of looking at an assessment that was done at Lifetime on one of the residents, and their ACE score was very, very low, but we recognized that there were some inconsistencies there. Do you remember that? And can you talk to that for briefly?
I do. And that is something that I would say is almost expected, right? Because in the assessment process, I'm asking questions. I'm gonna let go of some information as I go along. Us as clinicians, we can pick up on some of those things, but when I start asking direct questions about living in a home where there was physical abuse or where there was mental health issues, part of my intuition is going to want to protect my family. So I'm going to say no to these things. But the more questions I ask and the more things I can gather through the assessment and even through the initial treatment planning session and session afterward, can shed some more light on some of these adverse experiences. So asking the question once is not necessarily a one and done. It's also putting together the information, looking at it time and time and time again to understand the background of what's going on. So I get it as a client sitting in the chair. I don't want to tell you everything, right? So I'm going to leak it out other ways, and just putting it all together is going to help me to be able to build that.
Right. I think one of the other parts to that as well was because that was the environment they grew up in, and that was the norm for that experience. They may not know different. And so they don't recognize that some of what they experienced was aberrant and was created trauma. You know, it was an adverse circumstance. And our inability to recognize that because it was normal, and we think, not everybody grew up that way, is a factor of that as well.
Absolutely. A fish doesn't know he lives in water, right? I mean, it's the same kind of deal. I don't know that this is wrong if this is what I've been exposed to all my life. So having that awareness as a clinician is important as well. And I'll say this, right? In in addressing that and deconstructing that, it's not only emotionally impactful, it's also an existential threat in a way, because this is the worldview I have, and this is what I understand, and this is how I make sense of my place in the world. And now you're taking that away. So I can understand the threat and the wanting to protect that part. All right, so I'm going to jump into some agency data and then talk about some further information. So this is information pulled from the agency, February. This is February data. This is talking about our residential services, and this was a sample size of 96 active clients. And the ACE was obtained during the admission process. We use a state-sanctioned EMR at the time, at present, and the ACE questions are built in there. So there's a chart there. I'm a visual person, so I put a chart, but I'll also put down the actual breakdown here. And this is an all-male facility. So you can see that only 9 out of the reported number of individuals, which was 76, 9 out of 76 had none. Everybody else reported at least 1. So this is something that us as clinicians have to be aware of in the substance abuse world, that they're coming to us with some kind of adverse background, some kind of trauma background. And I'm also going to say, keep in mind, this is just based off the 10 questions. The expanded ACEs would probably put a whole lot more insight and may increase this a little bit as well. Trauma-informed practices and curriculums is helpful in giving voice to that. And I've also had the experience of people sitting in a process group saying, you know, I've never talked about this, and then all of a sudden they talk about it, and somebody else says, me too, or that's my experience, or I feel you, which is their way of saying I understand you. So then we're starting to build community of healing instead of community of isolation. Substance abuse thrives in isolation. Recovery is a communal project. So community is based not only for substance abuse recovery, but emotional and trauma recovery as well. Here's the data for outpatient services at sample time, February. 414 active participants, again, screened through the admissions process. There is a chart there. From the chart, we can already ascertain that there's more often than not something going on. And then there's a breakdown of the numbers there. So only 63 out of the 414 participants reported none. Interestingly enough, this is the first time I saw an ACE of 10, and this is an outpatient setting. So future considerations would also be considering how that may impact the level of care, and how prevalent the substance abuse is. And also wraparound services for mental health and physical health, because trauma is not just a emotional impact, it's a physical, mental, and emotional. And in just a minute, I'll talk about substance abuse, also the biopsychosocial. Even the mere act of putting insubordinate amounts of alcohol, drugs, heroin in my body changes my body chemistry and creates a shock inside the system, which is a traumatizing act in and of itself. So the mere use of substances could be a trauma consideration as well. We talked about this a moment ago. I'm not going to spend too much time on this one. This is what Russell was talking about with Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. Higher the ACE score, the increased measured health outcomes, including substance abuse and mental health issues. Mental health and substance abuse have always kind of coexisted. And from my perspective, I'm starting to see them blend a little bit more. I drink or drug to manage my mental health systems, and my mental health systems are exacerbated by my untreated trauma, because everybody wants to, and that sounds a little bit judgmental, but I'm going to say it this way: everybody wants to talk about my drinking or drugging, but nobody's asking me why I do it. So it's just merely changing the question of, what does it give you? Why are we doing this? Taking a open inquiry, compassionate approach, as opposed to well, you're shunned from society because you drink or drug too much. all behaviors make sense. We do things because they work for us. Okay. Trauma and adversity shape the way we see the world, ourselves, and others. So if I've always lived in an unsafe world, I grew up in a home with drugs or alcohol present and caregivers were neglectful or never there, then the way I perceive the world, or that people who come into my life as caregivers, including clinicians, are going to abandon or give up on me. So understanding that that's a perspective that client brings into the clinical setting and even into their families, which talks to why a system approach is important as well. A lot of broken down communication and trust issues happen within the family. One of the things that I remember talking about with family counseling at residential was we can talk to your loved one all we want and clean them up, but if we send them back to the same environment, the behaviors are going to return because it's a coping mechanism. So the system also needs some attention as well as the individual. Treating the behavior and not the individual creates a disservice to the underlying causes and conditions. The client is bringing their own history in, they're bringing in their own perspective, they're bringing in their own view of the world. And if we just address the behaviors and not what's underneath it, then we create a disservice in the certain level of care that we can provide. The biopsychosocial. So if you remember, those ACEs are between the ages of 0 to 18. The frontal cortex of the human brain is not developed till at or around age 25. So all these things are happening when we can't make logical sense or rational decisions about the world. One of the people that's helped influence my perspective on trauma-informed care, Dr. Bob Baer, I'm going to use his perspective, right? When we're 6 years old and we're hungry, we don't say, Dad's got to go to a meeting because he's drunk. We say, I'm going to starve and I need to eat. So the perspective of a young child is different than us as an adult, which has an impact on how we develop. Talked about this also a little bit here. That substance abuse doesn't just impact the individual, it impacts the system. Impacts my body chemistry and how I view the world as well. So understanding all that is an ethical approach to substance abuse treatment. And without support of the loved ones, then we aren't upholding trauma-informed or trauma-responsive guidelines. Okay, I think it's time for another drink of water. Is there anything for me at this point, Russ?
I am not seeing any new questions at all. It's a great review and reminder of the impact that these ACEs have and how they tie into the substance abuse as well. So well done.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I'm not going too fast, and I want to allow appropriate time for responses as well, because as is probably evident, I've got some energy and some passion around it, and I know that when I get energy going, I can just go. So I want to be mindful that I slow down and things like that.
You're doing great.
All right. So one of the things that I also will talk about with my clients is especially those who use meth, I would ask them, well, what's in meth? And they'd say, I don't know, rat poison and battery acid. And my go to them would be, okay, well, let's go in the storage shed and just drink some battery acid. Well, no, we can't do that. Why not? It would kill me. So understanding that it has the impact in the body helps to bring some awareness of this too. Or hey, would you give a 6-year-old a drink of beer? Why not? Well, it would destroy them. Yeah. So why are we doing the same thing to ourselves? Understanding that kind of perspective can help take a trauma-informed approach of let's look at really what's happening to you, and let's look at how it's showing up in your family systems as well. So I am now on treatment and support. So Working with those identified with substance use disorder includes safety, choice, and collaboration, which is part of SAMHSA's trauma-informed care. What I mean by safety is not only physical safety, but emotional safety as well. And that falls, a lot of that falls on the clinician. What are my judgments? What are my areas where maybe I have recognized that when a client starts going there and I don't feel comfortable, how quickly do I pull them out? How safe am I on that journey? And this is where it's incumbent upon us as clinicians to continue to do our own development and training around trauma-informed care, trauma itself, and how it's impacted us in our lives, so that we can become that safe, emotionally regulatory person in the room when somebody's with us breaking down, or talking about things they never talked about. We become the safety, a grounding tool in that moment. So being able to regulate and be in check with our own biases, judgments, and impact of trauma is important as well. Safety also goes to, client, I'd like to talk with you about this, and I think this might be important, but if you're not ready to go there, letting them be in a safe environment and in control. And that also goes to choice and collaboration. How would you like to look at this? Would you like to look at this? Is this something you'd like to work on later on? If so, then let's take a look at how that's impacting your substance abuse and how can we regulate now to help you get to where you need to be so you don't keep going into the self-destructive behaviors. Addiction is isolating, recovery is communal. So encouraging community support. And that goes back to safety, choice, and collaboration. Everybody's going to have their different idea of what's safe for them. Some people feel safe in 12-step rooms. Some people do not. Some people want to do a more faith-based, and some people do not. So it's really where the client is safe in building their community, giving them choice and collaborating with them to help get them to that place. And also the ongoing support for the emotional healing as well. Integration of trauma-informed care is essential to increasing prognosis of long-term sustained recovery. So going back to one of the questions that Russell asked me about an assessment that we looked at is, the client, when we work with them, is going to be telling us a whole lot more than they realize. And so in answering some of the ACE questions and looking at the assessment and working with clients during a treatment planning process and the initial sessions, that's going to help give us more information and tell us more information rather than just asking direct yes or no questions. So going through the ACEs is good, and it's also a continuing ongoing basis as we go along. As more comfortability is built with the clinician, there may be more that comes out. There may be some things that weren't identified before. So implications for us as the professionals, a do no harm and self-care approach. So overlooking key factors during treatment, causes and conditions, and other considerations, ACEs, trauma, challenges the notion of do no harm. So what I mean by that is leaving it, it's the way I see it is I'm going to the doctor for asthma and he gives me a Tylenol. What are we treating? Yes, the substance abuse is life-threatening and has an impact, but also there's something that's caused highly correlated with it. So ignoring that piece creates more harm in the long run. Continuing education on trauma and trauma responsiveness. There is a really big explosion right now of trauma. It gets thrown around a lot. At one of my work experiences working with teenagers, they would come in and they would talk about, well, I'm traumatized, or that's traumatizing, or not letting me stay up late at night. That's creating trauma in my life. So there's got to be some discernment about what we actually mean as trauma and how it's getting just thrown out there into the lexicon. And again, it's subjective. So I realize that sounds almost counterintuitive, but us as professionals understanding what we qualify as trauma. And I've even looked at some of the PTSD qualifications, and a lot of those are very similar to some of the things that clients present throughout their substance abuse. So maybe using that as a guide going forward. The most important thing I can say is to be trauma informed is to be trauma informed on ourselves. Being honest about how trauma has impacted us, how we're living with it, how we're working with it or ignoring it, how we take care of ourselves through it. What are we doing to work on our own areas? Because and this is at risk of sounding like a personal opinion, I can't take a client somewhere I can't go, right? So if they're going to talk about things like that, I have to be able to know how to pull them out as well and be comfortable talking about that with myself. I never know what's going to come up in an individual session or a group setting with clients. Okay, Russell, I see you popped on for a second.
No, we're good. I was just kind of assimilating a lot of this. When you're doing some of the group work, what are the conversations among the clients about this subject? Has that come up? Is that something y'all talk about?
Yes. So we've been intentional about integrating that in groups at residential. The first curriculum we used was Seeking Safety. And then we moved into Building Resilience program for men, which is a 6-week curriculum on trauma and trauma-informed care, especially with men. And there's a lot of mixed responses when it's brought up. It's very interesting to bring it up especially in a process group setting. Educational wise, when it's didactic, it's really easy to sprinkle in and kind of dibble dabble here and there and talk about how trauma shows up this way in a big setting in a didactic. But when it's a process group setting and you're sitting there with your peers in a therapeutic setting for 2.5, 3 hours, and trauma comes up, right? Some of the normal responses can be like, oh, I don't want to talk about this, or that has nothing to do with me, or wow, thanks. I never really had the opportunity to talk about this, or I never thought about this, or hey, I never knew I had this connection with this person. It's also in how it's set up and delivered. Walking into a process group and in the first 5 minutes going, okay, let's open our trauma bag and everybody dump it out. No, that's not going to work, right? Finding ways to ease into it, to bring the conversation and to bring it up in a safe way. So I've seen some mixed responses to it. And I'll be honest, some of the most energetic process groups I've walked out of are the ones where the energy's high and it's clicking and people are tears and anger and everything from empty chair to a pseudo surgery to remove a traumatized part, right? You can get real creative with it, and letting the client guide you where they want to go. That answer the question?
Yeah, good feedback. Dan Getz asked a question, and I love this because one of my early experiences with this was when I was working as an adult probation officer and got to see the impact of dual diagnosis clients. Now that we've got the ACEs study and are looking at that in combination with mental illness, what's your take on how that kind of flavors the soup, if you will?
From my personal opinion and for my training and looking at all this and everything, my first question is always looking at trauma and mental health, substance abuse. How has that shown up? When I work with clients, one of the things I like to do is a mini timeline. All right, tell me about 0 to now. When did you start using? What mental health was going on? When were you diagnosed? Or kind of putting it all together. And what I start to see is a similar of very high stressful events and the onset of mental health, or very high stressful events and the onset of substance abuse. And then it springs out from there. So to me and my perspective, it all starts with the dysregulation in the body and the mind and the emotions from the adverse experiences and trauma. And how that shows up in mental health, be it anxiety, depression. With Lifetime, we do a PHQ-9 and a GAD-7 at intake, which is an anxiety and depression screening as well. So we're looking at ACEs, depression, and anxiety, which are three of the most common manifestations of trauma and adverse experiences. And so even when I was working with the teenagers, I was asking the same question: well, what happened? I don't want to just treat what you're telling me now, but what happened? What's your story? So I see a high correlation between the two.
Got it. Megan says that she loves the idea of pseudosurgery, that we all have all sorts of tools and we can use our imaginations creatively like that. So well done.
Yes, that was one of my favorite psychodrama setups, if you will. And if I got time after, I'll kind of walk through what that process looked like. But it was one of my fun ones. Okay, so anything else for now? I got 2 case studies and then a recommendation page.
No, go for it.
Go for it. All right. So the perspective I'd like to offer on from this slide is this: flip the focus. Let's stop talking about the client for a second. Let's put this on us, on me. James, how have you been impacted by ACEs? What's my ACE score? What am I doing to process through that? What's going on with me? And I'll be honest, that is a scary journey a lot of the time. However, it also gives me a perspective of, on the other side of pain is healing. And that way I can help guide clients through that as well. Without my self-awareness, then I don't know what I'd be able to give. Self-awareness to me is the key point. So just being honest, I mean, if we look at the data, the data from residential and outpatient indicates all the sample size has been impacted. I'd venture to say if we did an ACE score now, we might get some similar results. So I think it's incumbent upon us to continue to work and heal on all levels, not just a clinical level, but those who provide direct services, those who work within the agency, those who work with families, because what goes unhealed comes out sideways, and it can create further impact later on. So a couple of case studies. I did change names on this to protect anonymity, but the rest of the information is as accurate as I could make it. So John Doe was admitted to residential treatment after completing an assessment. John Doe identifies as a member of the LGBTQI+ community. Upon admission, his ACE score was 7. Mid-30s, has had 15+ treatment interventions. During his treatment, John approached counseling team manager and requested a change of counselor because they were not addressing the trauma. Consultation with counselor was engaged and clinical decision was made to honor the request. So even clients coming in and saying, this is what I want to work on, listening to their voice and saying, okay, how can we respond to that, and not just ignore it. So even when clients come in and say, this is what I want to work on, it's a big indicator of how we've integrated that into care and the importance of it in a substance abuse community. So John began working with another counselor and reported that he got something out of treatment that he'd never gotten before, able to find freedom and open in processing some of the areas, along with gaining insight into beliefs, perspectives, and actions. He continued to elect to continue his recovery in a safe and supportive community after treatment. So that's one of the success stories about somebody who said, I've been through treatment before. I know the treatment answers. I want something more. I need to talk about what's paining me, aligning that individual with not correct, but clinicians who can meet that, and then a successful outcome from there. My next case study is February Davis. admitted to residential treatment with a reported ACE of 0. So this is one of those that came in and said, nope, none of that applies to me. Had a good childhood. Everything was fine. And then we do a little more digging. During the treatment planning, February indicated that my family was great growing up and that my family now was amazing. February was a referral from United States probation and had served 10 years in prison. So automatically my radar goes off as saying incarceration. Okay, well, there's some kind of trauma, there's some kind of impact to the system here, and to the individual, because one of the original ACE questions asks if a family member had gone to prison or jail. The more interesting question would be, have you gone to prison or jail? Because that in and itself is a traumatizing experience. When asked about his life and progression, February indicated he just made some wrong choices and lost my way, and that my past has nothing to do with what's going on now. 45 years of age and time of admission and substance use history since age of 14. So therapeutic interventions for February, 10 hours of counseling per week, 1 hour individual and three-hour groups per week, 10 hours of psycho ed. Several trauma-informed interventions were utilized during that time, including trauma-informed psychoeducational, trauma-informed process groups, looking at it on treatment plan, addressing it that way. So interventions were there. However, all met with intellectualization and emotional distancing. So just because they did not go there does not mean that they were not successful. It was just a way of enhancing the treatment. Throughout this case study, there are a couple of areas that were ringing in my head of, well, oh my gosh, just look at this, don't you? But then I have to back up and remember, this is the perspective of the client. It's subjective. I go where they go, not me telling you you're traumatized. So meeting the client where they're at and responding to that still resulted in a successful discharge because the objectives were met, understood causes and conditions, intellectually at that, abstained from substance abuse, gained some tools, took a look at some community healing. So there was no other, I can't punish somebody and keep them in treatment because, oh my gosh, you didn't open up a trauma area. No, that's going to happen. But being available when they do open it is our duty as clinicians and people in the field. And I firmly believe that substance abuse, when they come to our doors, it's a cry for help. There's, hey, I'm destroying myself, but there's something else behind all that. Us in the substance abuse field would be wise to remember that is the presenting behavior. There's something else going on underneath it, and be prepared for anything that walks through the door. Because we don't know if it's mental health, we don't know if it's a trauma history, we don't know if it's just somebody who's had a bad few weeks and started drinking excessively. We have no idea. So those are the two case studies. And then I'm going to get to my recommendations page, and then I'll open it up for more questions, comments. These are some great recommendations I would make. Dr. Gabor Mate's on there a couple of times. His stuff is very, very, very good. He talks about a compassionate inquiry approach. I'm going to plug him for a second. He was a physician in the Lower East Side of Toronto, where the substance abuse was very, very, very rampant. And in the realm of Hungry Ghosts, is a great perspective on what it's the substance abuse and the cycle of it. What Happened to You by Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Bruce Perry, another great trauma-informed approach. The classic The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Trauma and Addiction by T.N. Dayton. Waking the Tiger by Peter Levine. And then we get into the TED Talks and other resources. I will also point out that Facing Addiction in America, United States Surgeon General's report published in 2017, is the first Surgeon General's report of addiction that was published. So it is out there for download. and using as a resource. So there's a lot of professional information out there, and it is an emerging field that is very important to ongoing substance abuse treatment. And there were the recommendations, and I'm going to invite Russell to come back on if there's any other, while Russell's coming on. I didn't get to say thank you, everybody. I didn't get to see everybody's face, but thank you all for being here, for supporting this. Again, and before we get too far and I forget, I would like to wish everybody a happy Mother's Day weekend. And for the wonderful gift that motherhood is and we have come from. So thank you all for that. And thank you again to Monica and Russell and Gainwell and Lifetime and Christina and all the wonderful support in my life.
I had the opportunity to attend a 3-day retreat that Bessel van der Kolk provided, where he was talking about what he's learned about this. And it was just an amazing experience to have that firsthand account of it. And the interesting thing that he talks about is why trauma is not a part of the DSM diagnosis, where you should be able to say, yeah, this person suffered from severe trauma and therefore can have a diagnosis of something along those lines. So it's just interesting to hear his political side on that. But these are excellent resources as well. I love the case studies also. Somebody asked if they wanted to make a referral to Lifetime, how do they go about that?
So if they want to make a referral to Lifetime, I can give you a phone number. Actually, I'll put it in the chat. How about that? Instead of giving it, I will do that. All right, so I put it in the chat. You can go through our website. You can call us. We are here. Extension 2 will get you to admissions department. And then my information is in there as well, in the chat if you want to do any follow-up questions or anything like that. We're doing a lot of exciting things, and the more help we can be, the better community we build.
Excellent. I'm going to ask that you go ahead and stop your screen share. That way we can see your full face. Maureen did put the information on how to find the handouts in the chat box, so that was there as well. She also has put her contact information, so if you didn't get the handout and need a copy of it, you can email or call her for that. When you exit the webinar, you will be directed, or should be directed, to the evaluations page or the survey page. Once you complete the survey, we will send the certificates by email, so everyone will have a chance to get that. James, this has been just great information, and I love the fact that we're starting to integrate the ideas and concepts of the ACEs into treatment and recovery. And because it does have such a huge impact on the substance use population as well. So yes, they certainly do go hand in hand. Any final thoughts or comments, James?
Only thank y'all, because the more the information gets out there, the more conversations we have about it, the safer we can create treatment interventions and a safer world. So thank you all for taking that step into a safer, healthier community.
Great. All right, that does bring us to the end of our time. So excellent job. Thank you so much for putting the presentation together and sharing your perspectives and expertise. Very, very well done. All right. So as I mentioned before,
question. Do you see the very last question? What ages do you serve at Lifetime?
18 on up. We are an adult facility, so we are licensed to adults, so 18 and up.
Gotcha. I think I just pulled up your your webpage, so I was just looking at it too. So good, 18 and up. And are there any, do you do dual diagnosis clients there as well?
The primary we treat is substance abuse. We do have in our outpatient, we do have LPCs and LCSWs that work with a couple of our specialty tracks that work with mental health. We do have at residential, we also partner with a outside agency, a nurse PA that comes on. So they provide the psychiatric support where needed. So we are trying to create a very comprehensive approach. So our clinicians, our frontline clinicians are going to treat the substance abuse, and then we can use a psychiatrist in our expertise over at outpatient to help with the mental health.
Got it. All right. James, thanks so much. We also want to extend an appreciation to Ryan and Griswold for their support of the breakfast series and being our breakfast sponsor this morning. And I think with that, we'll go ahead and say we're done. Y'all have a great summer, and we'll look forward to seeing you again in August.